Have you ever been called toxic by someone you raised with all your love? I have. And it wasn't a stranger or someone who barely knew me. It was my daughter, the same little girl I stayed up nights for, the one I taught to take her first steps, the one I promised a better future. She looked at me, with cold eyes and a steady voice, and said, "You're toxic, Mom." Those words hung in the air, cutting through the space between us like an invisible blade. I can still feel the weight of them inside me, as if every syllable left a scar. In that moment, all I wanted was to understand what I had done so wrong, understand where love turned into control, where care became intrusion, where the desire to protect started being seen as suffocation. But her silence was the hardest answer I could have received, a silence that wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a wall, a barrier between us. And for the first time, I realized that love can be interpreted in ways that hurt. In the days that followed, I walked around the house trying to find answers. Every object reminded me of a version of us that no longer existed. The photos on the walls seemed to stare back at me, as if asking what happened to that bond once made of laughter and trust. I opened drawers, found old notes, memories of simpler times, and with every memory, a wound reopened. It was as if the past itself was asking me, "How did you let this happen?" Being a mother means carrying invisible guilt. It's living between what you wanted to do and what you managed to do. It's blaming yourself even for what fate decided. I wondered if I'd been too harsh, too demanding, if I had wanted her to be perfect to make up for my own flaws. And maybe, without realizing it, I had confused love with expectation. The truth is, I always wanted what was best for her. But in my effort to protect her, maybe I forgot that love also needs room to breathe. Nowadays, people call everything toxic. Any attempt to teach, any firm word, any boundary becomes a reason to be accused of control. But no one talks about the other side, the fear that lives in a mother's heart, the fear of watching your child get lost, the fear of seeing history repeat itself, the fear of watching someone you love fall into the same abyss you once knew. I know that sometimes my love might have seemed hard, but it was never cold. It was born from a heart that knew what suffering was and didn't want the same fate for the one who came after. And, still, when I heard that word, toxic, something inside me shattered, because that word carries a silent accusation. It says your love hurts. And what could possibly hurt more than believing that your love, the purest feeling you've ever known, became poison? I went days without being able to talk about it. I cried in secret so no one would see. I didn't want her to know how much it broke me, because that's what mothers do. They swallow their tears so they don't weigh down their children's hearts. But a mother's heart keeps getting heavier, little by little, until it feels like a stone. For a while, I blamed myself. I thought maybe she was right, that I really was the problem, that I should have loved less, interfered less, existed less. But how do you love less? How do you stop worrying? How do you learn to stay silent when everything in you screams for care? I didn't know, and maybe I never will, because a mother's love doesn't come with a manual. It comes with instinct, and instinct isn't always understood, but it's almost always right. There were nights when I sat in the living room staring at my phone, waiting for a message that never came. The clock ticked slowly as I replayed every conversation, every argument, every time I tried to help and was misunderstood. I didn't want her to see me as the enemy. I just wanted her to understand how hard it is to be both a mother and a woman, how heavy it is to be the foundation of everything and still be called toxic for trying to hold together what was falling apart. The world has changed, and children have learned new names for old pain. What used to be called concern is now invasion. What used to be advice is now toxic opinion. And I wonder, are we losing the true meaning of firm love? Is the fear of being misunderstood silencing the mothers who still try to teach values? I see so many women being criticized for loving deeply, for caring too much, for saying what no one else dares to say. And I think, since when? Did loving with strength become a mistake? I was never perfect. No one is. But I was always present, always there, even when the whole world turned away. And maybe that's what people now call toxic, being too present in a time when everyone wants distance. But a mother's love doesn't know how to disappear. It learns to stay quiet, but never to give up. Now, looking back, I understand that my daughter needed distance to understand what I was trying to teach. Sometimes destiny itself separates people so they can grow, and time, with its silent wisdom, reveals who truly stayed out of love and who was only there out of convenience. I'm still here, not as a victim, but as a woman who has learned to respect the timing of life. I no longer carry anger, but I still carry longing, and as painful as it is to admit, sometimes love also needs space to heal. But if there's one thing I've learned from all this, it's that tough love is never toxic. Tough love is the one that says no when the whole world says yes, the one that corrects because it wants to see growth, the one that accepts being hated just to make sure the other learns what's right. Tough love stands tall, even when it's misunderstood. And now, before continuing this story, I want to ask you something simple. Write in the comments where you're listening from, your city, your state, your country, because this story isn't just mine. It's the story of every mother who's ever been called overbearing, controlling, or toxic. It's the story of every woman who loves fiercely, who makes mistakes trying to do right, who gives until her last bit of patience because she believes love is worth it, even when it hurts. Maybe somewhere in the world there's a mother listening to this right now, recognizing herself, and maybe somewhere else, a daughter is starting to understand that tough love is real love, because in the end, a mother's love may be misunderstood, criticized, or rejected, but it can never be erased. It transcends time, silence, and pride. It survives everything, even the words that hurt more than silence. After hearing that word from my daughter's lips, I spent days trying to understand where it all came from. Toxic. That word stayed trapped in my mind, echoing endlessly. I thought about all the times I had to say no, the times I had to be firm, even when my heart wanted to give in. I thought about every boundary I set, every piece of advice she didn't want to hear, and I wondered if at some point I crossed the line between protecting and controlling. A mother's love is like that. Sometimes it's so intense, so desperate to keep a child from getting hurt, that it ends up hurting instead. And that was the mirror that broke me, realizing that the love I gave, she saw as a cage. I started revisiting every memory, like someone returning to places where they left pieces of themselves. I remembered her teenage years, the days I insisted on knowing who she was with, those arguments that ended with slammed doors and silent tears. I remembered the times I said no, that it wasn't the right time, the right person, the right path. I saw danger where she saw freedom, and maybe that's what she never understood. My no was never to stop her from living, but to stop her from suffering like I did. I didn't want her to repeat my mistakes. I didn't want her to learn everything through pain, the way I had to. But in her mind, I was the villain of the story, the woman who said no just for the pleasure of it, the mother who didn't trust, who invaded, who suffocated. I can't count how many times I heard her say, "Mom, I know what I'm doing," and how many times I silently replied, "You think you do," because that's how it is. A mother's love sees what a daughter's love doesn't yet understand. And that gap between what we feel and how the other interprets it is what destroys so many relationships. Now I realize the problem was never love. It was the way it was received. I loved intensely, directly, with advice, warnings, and care. She wanted a softer love, quiet and unintrusive, one that allowed her to make mistakes. And it's hard for a mother to accept that a child needs to stumble to grow. We want to be their shield, but time teaches us that sometimes the shield prevents them from learning how to fight. I remember one specific day. She had just started college and began to drift away. She said she needed space, that I needed to live my own life. That sounded so cruel to me. I thought, but she is my life. A mother's love has this dangerous habit of blending with the air we breathe, and when the child leaves, it feels like we forget how to exist. So yes, I called too often. I sent too many messages. I worried too much. And in her mind, that was being toxic. The mirror that hurts is the one that shows you who you are, but in a way you don't recognize. She looked at me with anger, and in her eyes, I saw a woman trying to break free. But break. Free from what? From love? From care? From the weight of someone who never gave up on her? That's when I understood that love, when it's too strong, can be frightening. It doesn't fit inside someone who hasn't yet learned how to receive it. And still, I don't regret it. Because every no I said was an act of love. Every argument, every harsh word, every tear I shed had a reason to protect. And maybe one day, she'll understand. Maybe when she becomes a mother, she'll realize that tough love is the most misunderstood kind of love in the world. Because it's not the kind that pleases, it's the kind that teaches. I spent a long time trying to fit into what the world calls a good mother. The modern mom who's her child's best friend, who never sets limits, who accepts everything. But I never knew how to love that way. I come from a generation that believed love is proven through care, and care requires firmness. Today, they call that control. I call it presence. Because love that watches from a distance is easy. The love that gets involved, that cares, that exhausts itself trying to keep the other from getting lost. That's the hard love, the real one. And yes, I make mistakes. Mothers make mistakes. The difference is that our mistakes never come from indifference. They come from excess. We love too much, give too much, worry too much. And in the end, we're still judged. But you know what I've learned? That being called toxic for loving too much is still better than being remembered for not having loved enough. Because time has a way of correcting wrong perceptions. What's misunderstood today will become gratitude tomorrow. Sometimes, I look at her from afar, through social media, and see how much she's grown. And even if she doesn't realize it, everything she is carries a piece of me. Every decision, every strength, every boundary she's learned to set comes from everything she once condemned me for teaching. And that's where love wins, when it keeps bearing fruit. Even after it's been forgotten. It's painful to realize that, in her mind, I was the mirror reflecting everything she didn't want to be. But now I understand. Children need to reject part of their mothers to become themselves. And that's okay. True love doesn't demand recognition right away. It waits. It trusts. It knows that time has its own way of healing what words once wounded. And if you're listening to me right now, maybe you've been called toxic too. Maybe you've been criticized for loving too deeply, for caring too intensely, for not knowing how to turn your heart off. I want you to know that doesn't make you less of a mother. It makes you human. Tough love is misunderstood because the world doesn't understand the power of no. But you do. You know that behind every boundary lies a hidden fear. The fear of losing, the fear of watching your child drift away, the fear of seeing destiny repeat what once destroyed you. And that's why I want to ask you something now. If this story is touching your heart, if at any moment you saw yourself in my words, if you feel that what I'm saying speaks to you, then subscribe to this channel right now. Because here, it's not just stories, it's healing, it's recognition, it's strength. Every video on the Matriarch's Secrets was created for women like you, women who love deeply, give endlessly, who've been judged, silenced, forgotten, yet still believe in the power of true love. When you subscribe, you're not just following a channel. You're joining a silent sisterhood of mothers and daughters who've chosen to turn pain into purpose. Here, you'll find stories that say what the world is afraid to say. Stories that reveal the truth behind family bonds, that make you look within and say, I'm not a mistake. I'm living proof of a love that endures. So before we continue, tap that subscribe button now. Do it for yourself, because you deserve stories that help you breathe again, that make you feel seen, that remind you it's still worth loving, even when it hurts. The next video might change the way you see love, forgiveness, and even yourself, and you won't want to miss what comes next. When I think about everything I've lived with my daughter, I can't help but look back to where it all began, because before I was a mother, I was a daughter. And maybe the way I loved was shaped by the love I received. I learned to love the way I was taught, with hardness, with silence, with fear of making mistakes. I grew up in a house where affection was a luxury and I love you felt like a foreign language. Love existed there, but it came disguised as duty. It came with expectations, with stern looks, with punishments that taught more about fear than affection. My mother was a strong woman, the kind who didn't know how to show what she felt, but did the impossible to keep everything running. I remember watching her wake up early, always tired, always alert, as if the whole world depended on her hands. And deep down, it did. but no one ever asked how she felt, and over time, she learned not to feel. I grew up watching a woman who loved in silence, who cared without smiling, who believed that crying was weakness. And without realizing it, I absorbed that version of love, a love that was firm but cold, protective but distant. When I became a mother, I swore I'd do it differently, that my daughter would feel the love I never did. But what I didn't realize was that love, when wounded, carries the scars of the past. I thought I was healing, but unknowingly, I was repeating. I told myself I needed to be strong and ended up confusing strength with rigidity. I said I wanted to protect and ended up creating fear. I said I wanted to teach and ended up imposing. Because when you grow up in a home where love comes hand in hand with discipline, you grow up believing that being tough is a form of loving. I remember once, as a child, when I got a bad grade at school. I trembled before showing my report card. My mother didn't yell, but her eyes said everything. Disappointment was the heaviest punishment. That night, I locked myself in my room and promised I'd never make her feel ashamed of me again. Years later, I realized I carried that promise into everything I did, and I passed that same pressure on to my daughter. When she made mistakes, I saw myself in her and wanted to spare her the shame I once felt. But by doing that, I stopped her from learning through her own failures. The past is a silent teacher. It teaches without asking permission. And I only understood that when I caught myself repeating my mother's words without noticing. You don't know what life is. When you have kids, you'll understand. One day, you'll thank me. All those words that once hurt me began to come out of my own mouth. And when my daughter called me controlling, I remembered myself looking at my mother with the same resentment. That's when I understood. I was the mirror of what I had lived, and she was the reflection of who I used to be. Back then, no one talked about feelings. Mothers from my generation didn't have the time to allow themselves to be fragile. They survived hard times, where love was proven through sacrifice. I love you was a hot meal on the table, clean clothes, a tough piece of advice, a do the right thing. And without realizing it, I inherited that same emotional manual. A manual that told me protecting means staying quiet, caring means giving orders, teaching means holding the line. What it didn't teach me is that love needs to be seen and felt, not just practiced. I remember the first time I saw my mother cry. It was at my grandfather's funeral. Until that day, I thought she was made of iron. Seeing that tear roll down her cheek scared me, because it felt like the world had cracked. But it moved me too, because in that moment, for the first time, I realized she was human. And maybe that's why, when my daughter sees me cry, I hide it, because in some way, I inherited the idea that a mother can't show weakness. A mother has to be a safe harbor, and safe harbors don't sway. But what no one taught me is that the harbor needs rest too. That love doesn't always have to be armor. Sometimes it can be shelter. And that's the lesson life forced me to learn far too late. I grew up hearing that love meant obedience, and for many years, I repeated that without question. I believed respect was born out of fear, that boundaries were walls, not embraces. And when my daughter confronted me, when she said I wasn't letting her be free, I didn't know how to handle it, because I was never free. I didn't know what that looked like. Her freedom scared me, because it was something I never had. I was afraid she would confuse freedom with abandonment. What hurts is realizing we raise our children for the world, but forget the world won't care for them the way we do. And sometimes I saw danger before she did. That made me act hard, almost desperate. A mother's love is full of fear. Fear of losing, fear of seeing them suffer, fear of not being enough. And when that fear comes from a woman who was never truly comforted, it turns into control disguised as protection. Today I see all of this clearly. I understand my mother loved me the way she knew how, and I loved my daughter the same way. It was imperfect love, but it was real. A love you learn by trying, failing, and showing up again. Because being a mother is just that, learning to love with what you were, given, and little by little, discovering a better way to love. And maybe that's what I want to leave here for whoever's listening. We aren't born knowing how to love. We learn. And sometimes we learn the hard way. We learn by noticing what we lacked and promising to do it differently. But even when we try to break the cycle, it still catches up with us, Because old wounds have deep roots. They shape the tone of our voice, the way we look, the way we say, I love you. The love I received was restrained, and the love I gave was too. But that doesn't make it smaller. A mother's love, even when it's stern, is the most honest love there is. It's the love that holds on when everything falls apart. It's the love that survives time, words, and disappointments. I want you, who are listening to me now, to write one sentence in the comments. I learned to love the way I was loved. Write it for yourself, to acknowledge where you came from, and to start understanding where you want to go. Because admitting that isn't guilt, it's healing. And before we continue this story, I want to invite you to something. If this video is touching you, if at any point you felt it spoke to parts of you no one understands, if what I've said so far made you think of your mother, your daughter, or even yourself, then subscribe to the channel now. Here, every story is a mirror, and every mirror is a chance to see yourself with more compassion. The Matriarch's Secrets is more than a channel. It's a space for healing, empathy, and rebuilding. When you subscribe, you join a community of women who chose to turn pain into wisdom, judgment into understanding, and silence into strength. Here, we talk about what the world pretends not to see. Imperfect love that is still the most powerful love of all. So hit that subscribe button now. Don't put it off. Do it for you. Because here, every story you hear has the power to heal your own. The argument started long before the words. It started with the way. She walked through the door, keys still jangling in her hand, phone wedged between her fingers, and an old tiredness sitting on her shoulders. I was in the kitchen, finishing wiping down the counter, when I felt the air change. A mother's heart recognizes a storm by the sound of silence. She dropped her purse on the chair, took a deep breath like someone about to run a marathon, and said, without looking at me, "You never leave me alone." The sentence landed dry, unpadded, like a verdict read by a judge at the end of a trial. I froze, cloth in hand, trying not to shake. Part of me wanted to say, I just worry, but another part knew nothing I said would be heard the right way. She went on, voice already rising. I can't take you monitoring every step anymore, asking where I'm going, with whom, what time I'll be back, why I didn't answer right away. That's not love, that's control. Control. That was the word that had been haunting me for months. Control. To me, it was care. To her, it was a prison. I tried to answer calmly, picking words that wouldn't inflame things more. Sweetheart, I ask because I worry, because the world is dangerous, because I've seen a lot, because I love you. She laughed in disbelief, a short, aching laugh. No, Mom. You ask because you don't trust me. You don't trust me. I felt the blow. Trust. I did trust her, but I also knew the world and its false shortcuts. I knew the kind of people who come saying they love you and leave with pieces of you. Knew the potholes in the streets and the holes in the soul. And because I knew, I asked questions. But questions, for her, were something else. Invasion. Toxic love. You don't trust me. I took a deep breath, set the cloth by the sink, sat down slowly, trying not to feel like a threat. She stayed standing, arms crossed, like someone who needed armor to hold herself together. You want to control everything. My job, my schedule, my friends, my relationship. I'm not you, Mom. I'm not going to. Live your life. It wasn't about making her live my life. It was about helping her avoid my falls. I tried to explain that, but my throat closed. I tried another way. I know you're an adult. I know you decide. I'm only asking you to think twice before handing your peace to someone who doesn't know how to protect it. She slammed her hand on the table, the sound echoing through the kitchen. You don't get it. I don't need your approval for every step I take. I don't need to send my location. I don't need to justify if I take longer to reply. I don't need to check in if I change my mind. I need space. And the word space felt like a knife. To me, space always meant absence. To her, it was oxygen. I said, okay, softly, but it wasn't okay. Inside, I folded into myself. I wanted to tell her about the nights I waited on the couch, fully dressed with my sandals on, just in case I had to rush out and pick her up somewhere. I wanted to tell her how many times I prayed, in my head, asking God to hold her where my hands couldn't reach. I wanted to list every scare, every intuition, every small miracle that made me believe questions can save. But I knew it wasn't a time for lists. It was a time to listen. And when I tried to listen, she went deeper. I'm not a child. You talk to me like I don't know anything. You text me like I can't handle myself. Sometimes I even feel guilty when I'm happy away from you. Because I picture you at home, sad, imagining the worst. That's not fair. The word unfair cut right through me. I, who had always fought to keep her from carrying weight that wasn't hers, had become the weight. I wanted to ask her forgiveness for making her feel guilty just for living. I wanted to say it wasn't manipulation. It was fear. But the word fear felt too small to describe what a mother's heart feels when her child walks out the door and the world looks like an open mouth waiting to swallow them. I tried to explain myself without defending myself, walking that thin line. I ask because if something happens, I need to know where to start. I ask because when you don't answer, my whole body feels like it's turning the house inside out. I ask because I love you, and yes, because I'm afraid of losing you. She shook her head, impatient. You always make it about you. Your fears, your past, your pain. Mom, I'm not your past. I fell silent. There it was, the heart of it all. I was using my ghosts as a compass, and to her, that was unfair. My emotional map was drawn in old ink over a landscape that had already changed. Then she brought up a recent example, as if presenting evidence. Last week, I went out with my friends. You called me 8 times, 8, and you even texted one of them. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was? I felt like a teenager. I'm 27. I bit my lip because she was right. I did call. I did text. I was nervous that night, a bad feeling in my gut, and me, who always trusted my intuition, clung to it like someone holding onto a plank in a flood. I had a bad feeling, I said. I just needed to hear your voice. She looked at me, her gaze sharp. Your bad feelings can't run my life. Silence. It sat between us, heavy and clawed. I looked at her and saw the woman she'd become, strong, quick, certain. But I also saw the little girl I once pulled out of the street in a split second, yanking her arm before a car could hit her. The gesture that saved her that afternoon now had a new name, suffocation, and I still couldn't figure out when holding a hand had turned into holding someone back. The argument swelled like a storm meeting open sea. She began listing moments when she mentioned a new job and I said, do this one, it's safer. When she wanted to travel and I replied, don't, that neighborhood's not good. When she fell in love and I asked, are you sure? Every "are you sure?" I ever said, with the best of intentions, turned in her memory into, you don't know what you're doing. The translation of firm love, in her dictionary, was stained with the ink of control, and it hurt to accept that to her ears I sounded so different from what my heart meant to say. I tried one last time, lowering my armor and speaking from the heart. I have flaws. I made mistakes. Sometimes my fear shouted louder than my love. Sometimes I asked you to call me not because I didn't trust you, but because I don't trust the world. I'm learning to let you live. She took a deep breath, thought for a moment, but pride, that old general, kept us from moving forward. Learning, Mom? You always find a way to come back. Always with a just one more thing, or text me when you get there, or FaceTime me so I can see you're okay. It's suffocating, suffocating. Another word that stuck. Hearing it made my skin prickle. I, who once breathed air into her lungs so she could live, had now become the tightening around her neck. I had no defense for that. Only memories of her. Fevers in the night, her teenage panic attacks, the times I sat on the bathroom floor just so she wouldn't feel alone. But memories don't help in arguments. They don't defend, they only remind. And I remembered. I remembered so much that I had to grip the edge of the chair just to keep from drowning in the tide of it. Then the fight reached its deepest point. She looked into my eyes and said slowly, like she wanted each word to leave a mark, I don't want you to decide for me. I don't want you to monitor my emotions. I don't want your fear to write my story. I want to live without having to calm you down all the time. That last sentence echoed inside me. Without having to calm you down all the time. I understood the exhaustion. I understood more than I wished I did. In the logic of our relationship, she had become the keeper of my anxieties, and that wasn't fair. I tried to talk about love, about motherhood, about instinct. I tried to say that even if I wanted to, I didn't know how to. Be different. I tried to confess that I was, in fact, seeking help, reflecting, trying to give fewer orders and more listening. I tried, like someone throwing ropes into rough waters, but she seemed tired of ropes. Mom, I don't want to hurt you, but I need to ask you this. Let me live my own consequences. Let me get things right without asking for approval and get things wrong without having to justify them. I closed my eyes for a moment and felt the weight of her words like I was handing a child into a boat on a winding river. But she wasn't a child. She was a woman, and the river wasn't mine to dam. The conversation heated up when I mentioned the name of someone who wasn't good for her. I was too direct, said what I'd seen, what I'd heard, what I feared. She took it as an attack. You don't know what we have. You always think everyone's going to hurt me. I told her it wasn't everyone. It was him. The air grew thick, the words sharper. I heard myself saying, I see what you don't. Yet see? And I hated myself for sounding exactly like my own mother used to sound to me. The circle, complete. Emotional inheritance passing through generations with the cruel precision of repetition. Suddenly, a glass almost slipped, not because it was thrown, but because tension steals strength from the hands. She caught it before it hit the table. The dry sound of the glass reminded me of childhood Sundays, when plates clattered louder on the days the adults talked about bills. The past always finds a way into the present, and with it comes pride, hers and mine, two forces holding their ground. I knew that if I pushed, I'd lose her completely, but if I stepped back, guilt would come like the tide. Between losing and blaming myself, I chose the narrow path, to breathe. Okay, I said, more firmly this time. You want space? I'll give you space. She seemed unsure. Really? I nodded. But I need you to understand that this is hard for me, not because I want to hold you back, but because I'm fighting with who I am. I was raised to care. I'm learning to trust. She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it. The silence grew lighter for just a second. Then it came back, nothing resolved, just said. She stepped away from the table, grabbed her purse, slid her phone into her back pocket, and stood with her back to me for a moment. I saw her shoulder tremble and wanted to ask if she was crying. I didn't. I stayed quiet, just as she'd asked so many times. The doorway looked bigger than it really was. Some doors grow enormous when they mean more than passage. They mean boundary. Before leaving, she said, without turning around, I love you, but I need to breathe. And then she left. The click of the lock sounded like a period, but I knew it wasn't an ending. It was the point in our story where care becomes invasion in the eyes of someone seeking independence, and invasion becomes care in the eyes of someone who's seen too much. The gap between protective love and possessive love isn't crossed with speeches. It's crossed with time, humility, and boundaries on both sides. The rest of the afternoon stretched like an old elastic band. I made coffee without tasting it, washed silverware that wasn't dirty, straightened drawers that didn't need straightening. The mind tries to tidy the outside when the inside is tangled. More than once, I almost picked up the phone, almost asked, "Did you get there safely?" Almost sent a heart emoji, almost typed, "I'm sorry if I said too much." Almost is the territory mothers live in when they decide to respect their children's independence. I stayed in the almost, hands braced on the counter, whispering to myself, trust. Trust what you planted. Trust what she's learned. Trust what you can't yet see. That night, I sat on the porch and listened to the city. The sound of cars, a distant dog, a TV playing too loud in some apartment. The world kept moving, indifferent to our domestic earthquake. I thought about the word invasion, and suddenly it felt like a mirror turned backward. Sometimes I really did invade. Other times, I simply reached out my hand. Often I asked to be part of her life because I still hadn't learned how to return to mine. It hurts to admit, but it's true. Many mothers, when their children grow up, lose their script. The story we know how to tell is theirs. Our own stays unwritten. And to avoid facing a blank page, we try to rewrite our children's story. We can't, and when we insist, they shout, "Leave me alone." Deep down, peace is what I'm looking for too. Peace to know I did my best, and that from now on, her best doesn't have to look like mine. Peace to accept that boundaries aren't walls that separate us. They're bridges that let us cross with respect. Peace to admit that my rush to protect may have been mistaken for a rush to control. Peace to learn to speak less and trust more without abandoning the essence of my firm love. Warning when the cliff is near, even if sometimes I need to say it differently. Maybe with fewer carefuls and more, I trust you, but will you look at this with me? When I went back inside, I found the table still marked by the ring of the glass that almost fell. I ran my finger over the damp circle and thought it was a good metaphor. It almost breaks, but it doesn't. Almost is where the chance lives. I grabbed the notebook I use so I don't overflow and wrote down 3 sentences to remember in the coming days. Care that I intrudes is fear in disguise. Love that respects boundaries is still love. And breathe before you call. I wrote slowly, like someone learning a language that isn't native. Maybe I'll never be fluent, but I can be gentler with myself and with her while I try. I put the notebook away, turned off the lights, and lay down with my chest lit up. It wasn't the end, I kept telling myself. It was a breaking point, and breakings are sometimes the only way truth gets in. The question that followed me now wasn't, how do I control, but how do I stay without invading? I don't have all the answers. I have one certainty. The love that teaches has to mature. Mine, especially. Tomorrow I'll wake up and start again from a quieter place. Maybe she'll notice. Maybe not yet. Fate, once again, will be the teacher. And I, even with skin marked by pride and pain, am ready to learn. Because in the next step of this story, what will save us isn't who wins the argument. It's who chooses the kind of peace that doesn't give up on love, but learns to be silent at the right time, until time builds the bridge our words couldn't. When the door closed, the sound echoed inside me longer than it should have. It was just a metallic click, common, ordinary, but it sounded like a sentence. I stood there, staring into the nothing, not knowing what to do with my hands. It felt like, along with her, the air had left the house. Silence took over everything, and it wasn't that peaceful kind, full of calm. It was the kind that weighs on you, tightens your chest, floods your head with thoughts you try to push away, but that keeps circling back. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the window. The sun still slipped through the cracks, but the day felt dark. Her words came back one by one, like echoes bouncing off the walls and returning stronger. You never leave me alone. You want to control my life. I need to breathe. They were just sentences, but each one carried memories. Memories of everything I did, thinking it was right. Memories of every time I tried to help and was misunderstood. Memories of every piece of advice I gave that was received as criticism. And for the first time in a long time, I asked myself if maybe she was right. Maybe I really did get it wrong. Maybe I loved the wrong way. That thought hurt more than any insult, because if she were right, then what had I been doing all my life? What had I turned the love I called protection into? I felt the weight of time, of every choice, of every no I said out of fear of the world. I always thought I was saving her. But what if deep down I was pushing her away? What if the love I believed was healing was little by little wounding? I spent hours trying to understand. I ran my hand over the sheets, old photos, letters kept in a box. In every image, a smile. And I thought, where did we lose each other? When did her gaze start to change? When did the little girl who ran to me become the woman who runs from me? The answer didn't come, only the feeling that I was empty. I looked at my hands, the same hands that held hers so many times, hands that cared, fed, protected. Now they trembled, and for the first time, I felt ashamed of what I'd done. Not ashamed of loving, but ashamed of not realizing that my love needed room to breathe. Maybe I talked too much when I should have listened. Maybe I imposed too much when I should have trusted. Maybe I wanted so badly to be the safe harbor that I forgot the boat needs to sail on its own. The clock struck 9 at night when I realized I hadn't turned on a single light. The house was in the dark, and so was I. I made coffee just to have something to do, but it tasted different. Everything did. The food, the smell of the house, the distant sounds of the street. It was like I was watching it all from the outside. Me, the mother who always had an answer for everything, suddenly didn't know what to say even to myself. I opened my phone, thought about sending a message, but deleted it before typing a word. I wanted to write, "I'm sorry," but wondered if it would be for her or for me. I wanted to write "I love you," but feared it would sound like manipulation. So I left the phone on the table and just looked at it. I, who so often tried to fix everything with a call, had to accept that some wounds only close with time, and that silence is sometimes the only medicine. And it was in that silence that I began to hear myself, the voice inside. Me, the one I always quieted so I could care for others, started to speak. It reminded me of old things, old hurts, patterns I'd never noticed. I saw myself repeating my own mother with the same tone of voice, the same suffocating concern, the same fear dressed up as care. I thought I'd broken the cycle. I hadn't. I'd only refined it, made it prettier on the outside, but it was the same hardened love on the inside. There, in that solitude, I understood something important. Firm love has to come with humility. I'm not the owner of the truth. I don't know everything. And maybe, in trying so hard to get it right, I forgot to keep learning. Motherhood isn't about being right. It's about being present. But too much presence can also be heavy. Too much love, without room to breathe, turns into weight. I kept thinking about all the times I demanded from her what I didn't know how to give: freedom. How many times did I ask her to trust me when I didn't even trust life? How many times did I ask her to be patient when I myself lived anxious to control everything? It's easy to point out what others lack. It's hard to look inward and admit the root of the problem is in us. And that night, that's what I did. I looked myself in the eye, without excuses, and I saw a tired woman who loved so much she lost herself trying to protect. I cried. I cried a lot. I cried not only out of regret, but out of recognition. I cried because I understood that loving doesn't give me the right to shape anyone. I cried because I realized my daughter isn't rejecting me. She's trying to exist outside the shadow of my fear. And that isn't selfishness. It's growth. I was the one who didn't see it. For the first time, I felt like asking for forgiveness. Forgiveness for confusing love with possession. Forgiveness for not realizing that true love has to let go. Forgiveness for trying to shield her from pain and, without noticing, becoming the source of another. But forgiveness, I learned, is a process. And before I asked for hers, I needed to forgive myself. Self-knowledge begins when pride goes quiet, and that night, mine did. I started to see that I'd always tried to be the perfect mother because I was afraid of being called a failure, and that fear made me act on impulse. Being firm was my way of hiding insecurity. Being rigid was my way of not falling apart. I thought that if I showed weakness, she'd lose respect for me. But true respect is born from empathy, not fear. The night was long. Each memory played like a film. The first time she fell off her bike and I shouted instead of comforting her. The time she cried over love and I said, "You'll get over it," without offering my arms. The time she wanted to go out alone and I invented 1,000 excuses to stop her. In all those scenes I was present, but I wasn't available. And there's a vast difference between being there and truly holding space. As the clock kept ticking, I realized the emptiness I felt wasn't her absence. It was my own. I had spent so much time trying to be everything for her that I forgot to be something for myself. And maybe that's why now, as she searches for her own space, I feel lost, because my whole world has always revolved around her. And when a world loses its center, it collapses. But sometimes collapse is necessary. It's what clears the way for rebuilding. It's what breaks old certainties so new understanding can take their place. I needed to let go of that image of a mother who knows everything, fixes everything, never fails, because that image is a cage, and I would only be free once I accepted being human. That night, I made a silent promise, not to her, but to myself. I promised I would learn to listen without interrupting, to love without suffocating, to care without controlling. I promised I'd let my pride rest and allow humility to guide me. I promised to try to be softer, because sometimes love doesn't need more strength, it needs more space. And maybe that's why I'm telling you all this now, because I know I'm not alone. I know there are many women listening to this story and seeing themselves in it. Mothers who made mistakes trying to get it right, daughters who pulled away just to breathe, women carrying guilt that isn't only theirs, but generations old. If you are one of these women, take a deep breath. It's okay. You are not your mistake. You are the love that remained after it. And before I continue this story, I want to ask you something from the bottom of my heart. Subscribe to this channel right now, because what we live here goes beyond words. The Matriarch Secrets is a space where stories like yours find a voice, where every video is a mirror, and every mirror reminds you that you've never been alone. Here, we talk about guilt, forgiveness, rebuilding, and love, but above all, about strength. When you subscribe, you become part of something bigger, a community of real women who are healing together, one story at a time. It's not just a button, it's an invitation to start again. So tap subscribe now and keep going with me, because what comes next will touch you in ways you've never felt before. This journey is ours, and it's only just beginning. When the hours of night finally turned into morning, I was still awake. The coffee had gone cold in the cup, my body was tired, but my mind too alive to rest. I kept replaying everything that happened, every word spoken, every glance that cut, and amidst all that confusion, one truth began to take shape. Everything I did, every gesture, every hard piece of advice, every no she hated to hear, all of it came from the same place: love. A love that doesn't always know how to express itself beautifully, but beats with the purest intention to protect. Maybe people on the outside will never understand what lies behind a mother's actions. When I yelled, it wasn't anger, it was fear. Fear of seeing my daughter fall where I had fallen. Fear of watching her trust the wrong people. Fear of seeing her repeat the same pains that took me years to heal. I never wanted control. I wanted to keep life from hurting her the way it hurt me. And maybe that was my greatest mistake, believing love could be a shield against the inevitable. I remember when she was still a little girl and would ask me why I was so strict. I told her it was because I loved her, but she'd frown, confused. She didn't understand that sometimes a mother's love doesn't come as a hug, it comes as a warning. I remember one time she wanted to go to a party, and with a tight chest, I said no. She cried, screamed, called me overprotective. That night, after she fell asleep, I sat on the couch wondering if I'd done the right thing. The next day, I found out there had been a fight at that party, and in that moment, I realized that, without knowing it, my no had been protection. But people who look from the outside don't see the love behind the toughness. They only see the no. They see restriction, reprimand, care that feels like censorship. And I know that hurts. I know because I lived it too. I also thought my mother was cold, that she didn't understand me, that she wanted to stop me from living. And now I see, she only wanted to stop me from suffering. The story repeats itself, only the names change. That's what firm love is. It sacrifices itself. It would rather be misunderstood than watch someone it loves fall apart. It carries the weight of being called toxic, old-fashioned, controlling, just to make sure the person we love has solid ground to stand on when the world starts to crumble. I know her generation learned to see love as freedom. Mine learned to see love as care. And somewhere in between, we lose each other. What she calls suffocation, I call presence. What she calls invasion, I call protection. But love is an exercise in letting go. It's understanding that love changes form over time, that the same arms that once held must one day open to let the other walk alone. It took me a long time to understand that, to realize that a mother's love, when it matures, has to become lighter, quieter, more trusting. I thought about how many times I'd been harsh, and the reason was always the same: fear that history would repeat itself. When she wanted to drop out of college, I panicked. When she wanted to date someone I didn't trust, my heart went on alert. When she told me she was thinking about moving to another city, I cried before I could say, go. But every one of those moments came from the same place, the fear of losing her. And ironically, that fear was what pushed her away the most. I remember one time she came home crying, and instead of holding her, I started giving advice. I wanted to fix it, to protect her, to erase the pain. But she didn't want solutions. She wanted comfort, and I didn't give it, because I had never learned how to receive comfort myself. So I did what I knew, tried to solve it. Today I understand that sometimes the wisest love isn't the one that fixes, it's the one that listens, the one that stays silent and holds your hand even when it doesn't know what to say. That kind of awareness doesn't come easy. We grow up being told mothers have to be strong, And we end up confusing strength with hardness. We get used to loving the way we were taught, to fix, to guide, to control. And only when the house is empty, the phone stops ringing, and silence becomes company, do we finally understand that love also means letting be. I look back now and see how honest my love was. Imperfect, yes, but true. Every piece of advice, every warning, every tear swallowed alone in the bathroom, it was all love. The problem is, love mixed with fear becomes a wall. And I built walls thinking I was building shelters. But now I know, too much protection keeps the light out too. Sometimes I think firm love is like an old house, solid, safe, built to last. But time changes, the world changes, and the windows need to be opened to let the air in. I was a closed house for a long time, and now, little by little, I'm opening the windows, because love that suffocates without realizing it must relearn how to breathe. There's one thing no one tells you. Being a mother means living in constant fear of being wrong. Every action comes with doubt. Was I too harsh? Should I have let her go? Should I have said it differently? Motherhood is made of uncertainties disguised as certainty. We decide, act, trust our instincts, and then wonder if we destroyed what we meant to protect. But true love isn't measured by perfection. It's measured by intention. And my intentions were always pure. Even when I failed, it was out of love. Even when I was strict, it was out of care. Even when I raised my voice, it was out of fear. A mother's love is made of sacred imperfections. It's the kind of love that endures, even when it's misunderstood. I remember an old conversation with my daughter when she was still little. She asked why I got so angry when she did something dangerous. I said, because my fear is bigger than your understanding. And today I see how true that still is. A mother's fear is love that doesn't know how to stay quiet. It's love trying to predict tomorrow, to protect today. But now I understand that fear can't be the compass. It can warn, but it can't lead. And that's what I want you, listening to me now, to understand. Tough love isn't the villain of the story. It's the love that tries to hold the world in its own trembling hands. It's the love that sacrifices, wears itself out, takes the hits in silence, and still keeps believing. I want you to write one sentence in the comments and keep it close to your heart. Not every love that hurts is toxic. Write it to remember on the days you feel misunderstood, on the days the world calls you hard when, in truth, you're just trying to protect the people you love. And before we continue this story, I have a request, but not just any request. If this video is touching your heart, if at any moment you felt this story is yours too, if these words stirred something that still lives inside you, subscribe to the channel now. Because The Matriarch's Secrets isn't just a channel, it's a refuge, a mirror for the soul, a place where pain becomes wisdom and imperfect love becomes insight. When you subscribe, you're not just following stories, you're joining a community of real women who understand the beauty and the ache of loving deeply. Here, every story heals a piece of what the world doesn't understand. Here, you'll find strength, empathy, and reconciliation. So tap subscribe now. Do it for you. Do it for the woman you are and for all those who came before you. Because in the next chapter, what I'm going to share will make you look at love in a way you never have before. When morning came, I wasn't crying anymore. The night's tears had dried, and what remained was the quiet of someone who understands but can't yet explain. And in that quiet, memories of my mother began to visit me. Her voice, her way, her strictness, all of it returned, as if time had looped back and I were still the daughter trying to understand a woman who loved me the only way she knew. For the first time in many years, I realized how hard I'd been on her too. And my daughter's words, the same ones that cut me so deeply, started to sound far too familiar, because once I said those same things. I remember the day I called my mother controlling. I was in my early 20s, certain the world owed me freedom, and any advice from her felt like a prison. She'd call to ask if I'd eaten, and I'd snap, "I'm not a child." She insisted on giving her opinion about everything, my job, my boyfriend, my haircut, and I swore she wanted to dominate me. Looking back now, I see she just wanted to keep being part of my life, but at the time, I couldn't see it. I only felt suffocated. And on one of those days, in a moment of anger, I said, "You're toxic, Mom." I never forgot the look in her eyes. It was brief, but deep. She didn't cry, didn't answer. She just looked at me with a kind of exhaustion I only understand now. In that moment, I thought I'd won an argument. Today I know I was breaking the heart of the person who'd given me everything. And time, so wise, put me in the very same place. The look I once saw in my mother's eyes is the one I carry in mine. The pain I once caused is the pain I feel now. That's how the cycle repeats. Daughters grow up swearing. They'll never be like their mothers until life makes us repeat what we never understood. We think we're breaking free, but we're just spinning the same circle, with a different color, a different era, a different name. And when it finally clicks, it hurts. It hurts to realize what I called too much control was really her way of saying, "I love you, and I don't know how to show it differently." My mother was strict, practical, quiet. She wasn't one to hug much or say, "I love you," out loud. But she said it in other ways. The plate of food waiting for me even after a fight. The blanket pulled up in the middle of the night. The clean clothes laid on the chair without my asking. I just didn't see it. I wanted love spoken. She only knew love done. I called her cold, but she was just tired. Tired from being raised by a woman even tougher. Tired from a time when feeling was called weakness. And that's where generational pain lives. A mother's love is passed down like an inheritance that carries the mistakes along with it. My mother learned to love by protecting me, and I learned to love by protecting too. Only the world changed, and the way we show love has to change with it. What used to be seen as care is now seen as control. What used to be firm love is now labeled toxic. I remember one specific afternoon when I was 17. I wanted to go out with friends, and she said no. I yelled, slammed the door, said things that still burn my throat to recall, and she stayed, silent. The next day, she woke me with coffee as if nothing had happened. I took that as coldness, but it wasn't. It was her way of saying, "I love you even when you hurt me." Forgiveness disguised as routine. Now, when my daughter yells at me and calls me controlling, I think of that. I think of my mother swallowing her anger, putting away her pride, and serving coffee the next day. I wonder if the love in the women of my family has always been like that, quiet but unbreakable. A love that doesn't know how to speak, but knows how to endure. And I see how noble that is, even when it hurts. It's strange to realize the story repeats not because we want it to, but because we're still trying to heal what was never understood. Every mother carries a piece of the pain of the mother she had. Every daughter carries the weight of not wanting to be the same. And fate finds a way to make us more alike than we imagined. It's a cruel mirror, but it's also the mirror of healing. Lately, I dreamed of my mother. In the dream, she didn't say a word. She just looked at me with that same calm gaze. I woke up crying, but with a peace I hadn't felt in a long time. I think she forgave me. Or maybe I finally forgave myself for not understanding her. I realized forgiveness isn't an event, it's a process. And the process begins when we stop pointing fingers and start recognizing truths. Today, if my mother were alive, I'd tell her, "Now I understand. I understand the care disguised as criticism. I understand the fear hidden in prohibitions. I understand the silence that stood in for a hug. I even understand the strictness that once enraged me." And I'd add, "You weren't toxic. You just didn't know how to be gentle in a world that taught you to be strong all the time." Maybe the same is true for me. I'm also a woman who learned to be too strong, who had to get up alone, raise a child alone, protect alone. And when life demands that much, sweetness sometimes gets lost along the way. Firmness becomes defense. Words come out hard, not from lack of love, but lack of rest. That's why when I hear my daughter call me toxic, I try not to answer in anger. I try to breathe and remember she's speaking from her pain, not from my intention. The love between mother and daughter is the strongest and the most challenging there is. It's a love that wounds and heals, that pushes and holds, that teaches and learns. Sometimes we need distance to see the love that was always there. Sometimes love needs silence to be understood. I learned that through time, through distance, and through longing, Today I see that life is a bridge between what we inherit and what we leave behind, and my greatest hope is that my daughter won't take a lifetime to understand what took me so long to see. That one day she'll look at me and realize the love that felt harsh was the truest love I knew how to give. That she'll understand I loved her in my own way, imperfect but whole. And if there's one thing I want you, listening to me right now, to take to heart, it's this. We never truly understand our mothers until we become one. Only then do we realize that their love had flaws, but it also had courage. That what we once called harshness was, so often, their way of holding the world together while everything else was falling apart. Write in the comments, I understand my mother now too. Write it if you've ever carried the weight of loving someone and not being understood. Write it if you carry the name of a strong woman who taught you how to survive, even if she hurt you while trying to protect you. And before we go on, I want to invite you to stay here with me. Subscribe now to the Matriarch's Secrets, because here, every story like this isn't just told, it's felt. Here, you'll understand that no woman is ever truly alone in her pain, her guilt, or her love. This is where mothers and daughters find each other again, even from afar. When you subscribe, you're not just clicking a button. You're saying, I choose to understand before I judge. You're saying, I'm made of strong love too, and I'm learning how to love softly. So go ahead, hit subscribe. Come with me, because what comes next is the moment when the silence between mother and daughter finally begins to turn into reconciliation. And you need to experience this with me. When the memory of my mother finally quieted inside me, a new kind of silence took over. But this time, it was different. It wasn't the silence that hurts. It was the silence that comforts. The kind that comes when you finally stop fighting the past and start understanding that it can't be changed, only embraced. I sat in the armchair where I always go to think, and for a moment let my body rest. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't trying to fix anything. I just wanted to feel the weight of the guilt I'd carried for so long, and maybe, finally, begin to let it go. Guilt has always been my most faithful companion. It's walked beside me like a shadow, even on sunny days. Guilt for being too hard, guilt for not being enough, guilt for loving too much, guilt for getting it wrong while trying to get it right. Guilt is the price mothers pay for loving without a manual, and I carried mine like a cross until I realized it wasn't bringing me closer to my daughter. It was pushing me farther away. Because those who live in self-punishment can't truly connect. Love doesn't bloom in soil soaked with guilt. It took me a long time to understand that, to accept that I did what I knew how to do with what I had at the time. There is no such thing as a perfect mother. There are mothers who try, who fail, who learn, who love even when they don't know what to do with so much love. I tried to be the mother life didn't give me, and in that attempt, I went too far. I got lost. I got confused, but that doesn't make me cruel. It makes me human. And in that moment, that word, human, started to sound like freedom. I took a deep breath and realized that the forgiveness I'd been waiting for from my daughter might need to begin with me. Because as long as I kept punishing myself for every mistake, for every word said in the heat of worry, I would never be light enough for her to want to come close again. We teach our children to forgive others, but rarely to forgive their parents. And almost never do we teach mothers to forgive themselves. I had to learn that on my own. I closed my eyes and saw myself young again, holding her as a baby. I remembered the smell of her hair, the warmth of her skin, the sound of her laughter. That memory helped me understand that behind everything, there was always good intention. Every time I said no, it was because the yes scared me. Every time we argued, it was because I wanted to be heard, not because I wanted control. Every time I said, I just want what's best for you, it was because the fear of seeing her suffer was bigger than me. And when I understood that, part of the pain melted away. Forgiveness isn't a sudden act. It's a slow process, made of small releases, deep breaths, and understanding. I began to forgive myself in the simple things. Whenever a shameful memory surfaced, I'd tell myself, in that moment, you did what you knew how to do. That sentence became a mantra, a prayer, a bridge between the woman I was and the woman I want to become. People think forgiveness is the end of pain, but really, it's the beginning of healing. When we forgive ourselves, pain shifts its place. It doesn't disappear, but it stops ruling us. It begins to teach instead. And that's what happened to me. The memories were still there, but without the same weight. The regret was still there, but it no longer paralyzed me. I started to see my story with more tenderness. Sometimes I caught myself smiling alone, remembering the small things. The first time she rode a bike, the day she brought me a flower she'd picked from the garden, the birthday when she hugged me so tight I thought the world could stop right there. Those memories reminded me that behind every fight, behind every wound, there was always love. And love, no matter how bruised, always finds a way to come home. I started to look at myself with more compassion. I, too, needed comfort, and no one gave it. I needed patience, and life had none. I learned motherhood on my own, stumbling, improvising, trying to get it right in a role that has no rehearsal. And now I see that I deserve the same. Forgiveness I've always given others, because forgiving yourself is an act of courage. It's the first step toward being at peace with who you've become. I began to make peace with the mirror. I stopped looking just to see what had aged and started noticing what had endured. The lines on my face are proof that I lived and survived. The wrinkles around my eyes aren't flaws. They're records of every tear I cried for love. My hands, worn and tired, are witnesses that I built more than I broke. Motherhood shaped me, hardened me, but it also gave me depth. I learned that firm love isn't cruelty. It's care with courage. It's the kind of love that faces conflict instead of running from it. The love that holds on when everything else is falling apart. The love that gets hit and still chooses to stay. That's the kind of love I was, and now I know I don't have to be ashamed of it. Sometimes, all we need is to change the lens to understand our own story. I wasn't a bad mother. I was a present one, an intense one. A mother who loved too much. And yes, that too much made me stumble. But between failing from lack of love and failing from an overflow of it, I'd still choose the overflow. Because that's what kept me alive, kept me fighting, kept me believing. Write this in the comments. I did what I knew how to do. Write it to remind yourself that you are human too, that the love you gave, even imperfect, was real. Write it to free yourself from the guilt that's been holding you for years. Because sometimes all we need is to hear or to say that we did the best we could. That night, before going to sleep, I picked up an old photo of us, both laughing, the wind tangled in our hair. I held it against my chest and promised that when she came back, I wouldn't try to be perfect anymore. I would just be a mother, the kind who still makes mistakes, but learns, the kind who speaks, but also listens, the kind who teaches, but allows herself to be taught. And that's why I want you to stay here with me, because what comes next is about reunion, about the moment when life gives you another chance to begin again, and you have to be ready to recognize it. But before we continue, subscribe now to the Matriarch Secrets. Here, you'll learn that love which demands can also heal. That strong love is the one that carries through generations. That forgiveness begins within and transforms everything outside. Every video here is a mirror, one where you can see yourself and finally set yourself free. So go ahead, hit subscribe. Do it for you. Because in the next chapter, you'll see that when love learns to forgive itself, it has the power to be reborn. Even after being called toxic, time has a mysterious way of answering the questions we ask through tears, and sometimes it answers without saying a single word. One day, life itself takes charge of showing us what our hearts refused to understand. That's what happened with my daughter. I didn't have to speak, didn't have to justify, didn't have to prove anything. Time, that silent judge, took care of putting everything in its place. I remember the day she called me. Her voice trembled, pride bruised, heart wounded. On the other end of the line, I recognized a tone that once was mine, the sound of someone trying to sound strong while standing at the edge of breaking. And in that instant, I understood. Time was returning the lesson, not as punishment, but as revelation. What she once called harshness, she now called strength. What she once judged as coldness, she now saw as protection. Life is ironic, It makes us feel on our own skin the very things we once condemned in others. My daughter, who used to say I was too strict, was now learning to be strict too. Not because she wanted to, but because she had to. The world teaches in ways we never forget. I listened to her speak, and in silence I remembered all the times I had tried to spare her from this. But I realized, if I had succeeded, she might never have understood what she now did. During that call, there was no apology. No, Mom, you were right. But there was something far greater. Silent recognition. The words left unsaid carried more truth than any rehearsed sorry. I could feel, in her voice, the maturity that time had given her. The woman she'd become had finally found within herself the mother she once denied. She told me life was hard, that people she trusted had let her down, that she was tired of being strong all the time. I just listened. I didn't interrupt, didn't advise, didn't say what I once would have said. Time had taught me that love also knows how to be quiet, that sometimes listening is the purest way to love. As she spoke, part of me wanted to say, now you understand what I felt. But another part, the one that had ripened with time, knew I didn't need to. Life was already speaking for me. And seeing my daughter facing her own storms filled me with a strange blend of pain and pride. Pain, because every mother aches when her child hurts. Pride, because even if she didn't know it, she was drawing strength from the roots I'd planted. She said, Mom, sometimes I think I'm becoming like you. And I smiled, even as my heart clenched, because no matter how far she tried to run, it was inevitable. One day, every daughter realizes she carries within her the mirror of her own mother, but they only see it when that reflection shows up in the hard times, in the resilience, in the courage, in the way they rise after falling. I saw her repeating phrases that were once mine, reacting in ways she once criticized, and it was in that unconscious reflection that love began to heal. What had once been resentment became understanding. What had once been distance became connection. Time had done what I never could with words. Life gives answers, but never hands them to you. It teaches through loss, through challenges, through sleepless nights and broken hearts, and it's in that soil of pain that love blooms again, more mature, more honest, more quiet. I began to realize how much time reshapes a mother's love. At first, it's loud, a cry, an urgency, an attempt to control the uncontrollable. Then it becomes waiting, and finally, it turns into invisible presence, the kind that doesn't need to be remembered to be felt. That's how I felt now. I was there, even when she didn't say it. I was part of what held her upright, even when she didn't see it. The roles had reversed. The woman who once called me toxic now tried to protect the ones she loved. The one who said I was too controlling now understood the desperation of wanting to shield someone from pain. And that's where life shows its cruelest and most beautiful mirror. Because it's only when we catch ourselves repeating our mother's gestures that we understand. She wasn't authoritarian, she was just human. I remember the day she called me crying and said, Mom, now I understand. 4 simple words, yet within them lived an entire world of reconciliation. I didn't cry, though my heart collapsed inward. I just replied, I know, my daughter. And in that, I know, there was everything I no longer needed to explain. There's no manual for motherhood, no shortcut to escape a child's judgment. But time, that old wise teacher, shows us that true love doesn't need to be understood to be eternal. It only needs to endure. Sometimes I think a mother's love is like the wind, invisible, but impossible not to feel. Even when there's distance, it's there, moving what seemed still, touching what seemed lost. That's what happened to us. The wind changed. Life blew in the right direction, and what once felt irreversible slowly began to align again. My daughter, without realizing, started reaching out to me more, not as often as before, but deeper. The conversations weren't about the past anymore. They were about life, about now, about her. I could hear the care in every word, the affection hidden between the lines. Sometimes she'd say, "You okay, Mom?" And I knew that was her way of saying, "I miss you." And that's why I tell you, life answers. Sometimes it takes time, sometimes it hurts, but it always answers. And when it does, it's not to humiliate, it's to heal, because time has no ego. It doesn't seek revenge, it only reveals. Now, When I look back, I don't feel the need to be right anymore. Love won. It won in the silence, in the maturity, in the way life circled us back to each other, older, softer, more human, more alike than ever. Time is the true reconciler. It doesn't erase the wounds, but it heals them. And when we let time do its work, we realize nothing was in vain. Every tear had a purpose. Every distance had a reason. Every harsh word made space for a deeper understanding. In the end, every daughter must live through her own chaos to understand her mother's. Every woman must be wounded to grasp the love that once tried to protect her. And every mother must learn to wait, not with despair, but with faith, for time to return love in its own moment. And when that moment comes, there's no need for words, only gratitude, because life, in its quiet wisdom, always returns what love refused to let die. The reunion didn't happen with background music or tears in slow motion. There were no desperate embraces, no rehearsed apologies. It was simple, raw, human. She arrived, and I just looked at her, a look carrying years of distance, swallowed words. Resentment, longing, and above all, love. A love that never died. It only went quiet, waiting for the right time to be heard again. She stepped in slowly, like someone entering familiar ground, but still afraid of being turned away. And I stood there, in the middle of the room, with a knot in my throat that made breathing hard. It was strange to see her there, the same girl who once called me toxic, now with eyes tired, mature, maybe remorseful. And yet, I felt a relief so deep, it was as if time itself had paused just to give me back what life had taken. I didn't need to ask why she came. Life had already taught me not to chase answers. Sometimes love only needs presence. So I smiled, a gentle smile, without irony, without bitterness. The smile of someone who finally understood that you don't have to win to be at peace. And in that moment, the silence between us said everything. She didn't need to explain herself, and I didn't need to forgive her, because love had already done that for us, deep inside, in the place where pride can't reach. She looked at me like someone seeking shelter, and I realized that despite all the years apart, I was still her safe harbor. Because no matter how much children grow, fight, or drift away, a mother remains the only place where love asks for nothing in return. A mother's love keeps no receipts, makes no calculations, demands no repayment. It simply waits, with patience and faith, for the moment when the child's heart remembers where it came from. I wanted to hug her, but I hesitated. The fear of breaking the moment kept me still. And yet, the hug happened, not with arms, but with our eyes. There are looks that embrace better than any gesture, and in that moment, time itself seemed to bow before us. Everything that had hurt, everything that had been said, everything misunderstood, it all shrank before what still remained between us, love. She began to speak. Her voice trembled, carrying the weight of every memory. "Mom," she said, and that single word was enough to make my heart collapse. No matter how many years go by, when a child calls for their mother, it's as if all of creation folds into one sound. Mom. There is no word in the world more powerful, more healing than that. She tried to explain, talked about how suffocated she'd felt, how she needed to find her own path, how she thought my love was control. And I listened. This time, I truly listened, without interrupting, without defending myself, without needing to explain. I no longer needed to be understood. I only wanted to understand, because time teaches us that forgiveness doesn't need confession, only the willingness to see the other with tenderness. As she spoke, I saw the little girl behind the woman. I saw the fear behind the anger, the longing behind the accusations. I saw how hard she fought to be strong, and I understood. Maybe she never hated me. Maybe what she hated was the part of me that lived inside her, the part she hadn't yet learned to accept. Because it's easier to fight with your mother than to admit you resemble her. Love returned slowly, as if afraid to be interrupted. It came back through small gestures, a lingering glance, a brief touch of the hand, a cup of coffee made in silence. It returned through quiet care, through half smiles, through laughter held back. It came back in the simplicity of two hearts that finally understood. Real love doesn't need a stage. It survives in the everyday, in the small things, in quiet presences. I watched her and saw how time had shaped her too. She was no longer the impulsive girl who needed to prove herself to the world. She was a woman now, one who had felt the weight of life. And seeing that, I realized there was nothing left to teach, only to share. The bond between mother and daughter is that, an endless exchange between what's been learned and what's still being learned. When she held my hand, no words fit. There was only silence, but the kind filled with peace, the kind that doesn't hurt but soothes, the kind that comes after the war when no one has won, but both have survived. And survival, sometimes, is the greatest victory there is. I thought about everything we had lived, the arguments, the tears, the harsh words, the calls ended in anger, and I realized that love had survived it all. It had survived the words that cut deep, the judgments, the distance, because a mother's love is stubborn. It endures every storm and returns, whole, even if in pieces. And it was there, in that simple reunion, that I finally understood. I'm not toxic. I'm not cold. I'm human. I am made of love and flaws, of mistakes and attempts. I am made of care and fear, of strength and exhaustion. I loved the only way I knew how. And no matter what the world tries to call it, I know what I lived. I know what I felt. I know that every choice I made had love at its root. She smiled, and I smiled back. And in that smile, there was forgiveness. There was gratitude. There was everything we hadn't managed to say in years. Forgiveness doesn't need to be declared. It recognizes itself, and I recognized hers in the light of her eyes, a light that finally returned to me the peace I had lost. Love didn't come back the same. It returned wiser, truer, less idealized. It came back without the need to be perfect, without the illusion that it would never hurt again. It came back with the understanding that real love sometimes wounds, but always chooses to stay. And that's the difference between love that lasts and love that breaks. The one that lasts accepts the cracks. That day, there were no promises. We didn't agree to forget the past, nor pretend nothing had happened. We simply let time do what it always does, move forward. And in that moving forward, we found a new way to love, calmer, freer, more human. And maybe that's what true love really is, when we stop trying to fit the other into our expectations and start loving them for who they are, without molding, without demanding, without trying to correct them all the time. Love matures when it learns to respect the other's individuality. When she left that day, I didn't cry. I just stood in the doorway, watching her go. And for the first time, I felt peace, because I knew there was nothing left between us except what truly matters. Love, a love clear of noise, guilt, and fear. The distance, once a wound, was now space, a healthy space, one that doesn't separate, but breathes. And I breathed deeply. The air felt light, my heart calm, my soul whole. I closed the door slowly, and inside me there was a beautiful silence, the kind that only exists when the soul is at peace. I knew that reunion didn't erase the past, but it redefined everything. And that was enough, because in the end I realized there are no perfect mothers, no perfect daughters. There is only love. And love is this, sometimes confusing, sometimes painful, sometimes distant. But if it's true, it always finds its way back, always. And as the echo of that thought filled me, I understood that maybe the greatest miracle of love is this. It allows us to begin again, without needing to explain, without needing to forget, simply to continue. And that's what I did. I continued. To be a mother is to hold up the world without complaining about its weight. It's to love even when your heart bleeds, to teach when no one thanks you, to be remembered sometimes only for what you did wrong, and still to keep going. Because a mother's love isn't made of recognition, it's made of faith. And it was that faith that held me when silence was the only answer. It was faith that taught me to wait, not with despair, but with hope. Because true love, the kind that is firm, that teaches, that corrects, that sustains, is never lost. It only matures. Today I understand what once hurt me. To love is not to please. To love is to transform. And transformation takes courage. Courage to say no when the world screams yes. Courage to hold on when your child wants to run. Courage to be misunderstood and still not give up. Strong love is the kind that endures judgment from those not yet ready to understand, and that is divine, because only a love that comes from God can bear the weight of being misunderstood and still remain love. I've learned that being a mother is to walk between extremes, between gentleness and discipline, between silence and words, between staying and letting go. It's a delicate dance, with steps that don't always find music. Sometimes we stumble, sometimes we hurt without meaning to. But even stumbling, we keep going, because love doesn't let us stop. Being a mother is, so often, to play the villain in someone's story, someone you only ever wanted to protect, and with time, to accept that this is the price of loving truthfully. Because real love isn't afraid to displease. It has purpose, it has roots, it anchors itself in the soul and endures through time. Today, I no longer ask to be understood. I only ask to remain an instrument of this steady love, the love that corrects, that shapes, that saves. Because the kind of love that only comforts is beautiful, but the kind that transforms, that love is eternal. It's that love that keeps mothers standing, even when the whole world tries to bend them. And maybe that's the great truth of life. To be a mother is to endure judgment so that the one who judged can have a future. It's to hold the pain now so that the other learns to hold their own later. It's to be the bridge between what was and what is yet to come. Steady love is the love that endures. It doesn't need applause. It doesn't need to be understood. It only needs to be lived. Because in the end, it's the one that teaches what time alone cannot. It's the one that stays, even when everything else fades away. And that's why this story ends like this, with silence, with gratitude, and with peace. Because the love that teaches is the love that sets free. The love that sustains is the love that heals. And the love that gives, even when nothing is returned, is the love that leaves a legacy. Now, take a deep breath and let this story stay with you for a moment. And before you go, look at the video appearing on your screen right now. It's also part of the Matriarch Secrets. It's another story, but it carries the same strength, the same truth, the same love. Because every video here is a mirror, and in one of them, you'll see yourself. Maybe not as a mother, maybe as a daughter, maybe just as someone trying to understand what it really means to love. Watch the next one. Allow yourself to feel. Because firm love continues, in words, in memories, and in every story still waiting to be told.